What is it?
I have you to thank for it. For the first time in my life, when confronted with a horrible, insensitive person, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I said it.
There are stories that Hollywood never quite lets go of, scandals that get folded into the mythology of an era, repeated so many times that the original truth gets buried somewhere beneath the headlines and the hot takes and the tabloid covers. The story of Meg Ryan and Russell Crowe is one of those stories. For more than 2 decades, it has followed her everywhere. She walks into a room, and people remember it. She gives an interview, and someone inevitably brings it up. She disappears from public life for years, and when she comes back, the first thing anyone wants to know is whether she has anything new to say about what happened on the set of Proof of Life in the year 2000. And now, at 64 years old, Meg Ryan is finally talking. Not in the defensive, guarded way she once did when the wounds were still fresh and the press was still circling, but in the measured, unhurried way of a woman who has had 25 years to think about what happened, to understand it, to make peace with it, and to decide what she actually wants the world to know. What she is saying is not what most people expected. It is not an apology. It is not a confession. It is something far more interesting than either of those things. It is the truth, told on her own terms, in her own time, by a woman who spent the better part of a decade being defined by a story she never got to tell herself. To understand what Meg Ryan is saying now, you have to understand who she was before the scandal. You have to go back to the 1990s, to the era when she was not just a movie star, but something closer to a cultural institution. She was the face of romantic comedy, the actress whose name on a poster was enough to guarantee that audiences would show up. When Harry Met Sally had made her a star in 1989, and the decade that followed turned her into something else entirely. Sleepless in Seattle, French Kiss, You've Got Mail. 4 films that together grossed more than $670 million worldwide. A $15 million paycheck for a single movie at a time when that kind of money was almost unheard of for an actress. She was America's sweetheart, a title that sounds warm and inviting, but comes with a set of unwritten rules that are anything but. America's sweetheart is not allowed to be complicated. She is not allowed to make dark films or difficult choices or messy personal decisions. She is not allowed to leave her marriage, even if that marriage has been broken for years. She is not allowed to fall for someone new while the ink is still drying on the divorce papers. And she is absolutely not allowed to refuse to feel ashamed about any of it. Meg Ryan broke every one of those rules, and the industry made her pay for it in ways that took years to fully understand. The marriage to Dennis Quaid had been crumbling long before Russell Crowe ever entered the picture. This is the part of the story that the tabloids consistently got wrong, partly because the tabloids were not interested in complexity, and partly because the simpler version, the one where a woman blows up a happy marriage for a handsome co-star, was just a better story. But Ryan has been consistent about this over the years. In a candid interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2006, she described the marriage as unhealthy, saying it had not been a working marriage for a long time, and that she probably should have walked away much earlier than she did. The relationship with Quaid had been strained by competing careers, by the lopsided nature of fame, by personal struggles that Quaid himself has spoken about openly in subsequent years. By the time the couple announced their separation in June of 2000, the marriage had been over in every meaningful sense for quite some time. But the timing of the separation, coming as it did just as photographs of Ryan and Russell Crowe began appearing in the press, made it almost impossible for the public to see the situation clearly. The images told a story, and the story was irresistible. America's sweetheart, photographed holding hands with an intense, volatile Australian actor outside a Hollywood party. The two of them seen together in London during filming, in restaurants, in clubs, looking very much like two people who were not just CO stars. The narrative assembled itself almost automatically, and once it was assembled, it was nearly impossible to dismantle. What people forget is how those photographs actually came to exist. Meg Ryan and Russell Crowe met on the set of Proof of Life, a thriller in which their characters were written to develop a romantic connection. The film required them to spend months together, to build chemistry, to convince audiences that something real was happening between these two people. When something real did begin to happen between them, it was not, as the tabloids suggested, a calculated act of betrayal. It was two people caught up in circumstances that are actually quite common on film sets, where the intensity of the work, the long hours, the emotional intimacy required by the craft, creates conditions that the real world rarely replicates. What made Ryan's situation unusual was not that it happened, but that it happened to the woman the public had collectively decided should be immune to that kind of human messiness. She was, by one friend's description, extremely infatuated with him, and Crowe, whose public image was defined by his intensity and his temper and his willingness to say exactly what he thought, was in his private life apparently capable of a different kind of feeling entirely. He wanted to build something with her. He gave her gifts that were not the casual offerings of a man treating a relationship lightly, a 1963 Buick, a puppy. He spoke, to the people around them, about wanting to marry her, about wanting to have children with her. This is the part of the story that never made it into the tabloids. The version that did make it in was considerably simpler and considerably less flattering to Ryan. But at 64, she has reached a place in her life where she is no longer particularly interested in the version that the tabloids printed. She is interested in what actually happened. What actually happened, is that the relationship, for all its intensity, was not built for longevity. The obstacles were real and significant. Crowe was rooted in Australia. Ryan was rooted in Los Angeles. She had a son, Jack, who was 8 years old when the affair began, and whose life could not simply be uprooted to accommodate a relationship that was still finding its footing. She was also, by her own later account, emotionally exhausted by the dissolution of her marriage. She had just spent years inside a relationship that had not been working, and the idea of immediately committing to something new and serious and geographically complicated was more than she could realistically take on. When the relationship ended by late 2000, with both of them spending the holidays on different continents, it was not because the feelings had not been real. It was because real feelings are sometimes not enough. What followed the breakup was, in many ways, harder than the breakup itself. Ryan had expected criticism. She had not expected the scale of it. She had not expected the totality of the transformation in how the public saw her. She had been America's sweetheart for a decade, and then, in what felt like a matter of weeks, she became something else. The woman who had made audiences believe in love was now being described as someone who had destroyed it. Her films began to struggle at the box office. The roles that had once come to her easily became harder to find. She made Proof of Life, which underperformed partly because she and Crowe, unwilling to face the inevitable questions about their personal lives, pulled back from the press tour in ways that damaged the film's promotion. Its director, Taylor Hackford, said publicly that he was deeply hurt by their choices, that he had made a film and wanted to promote it, and his two lead actors had left him to do it alone. Then came In the Cut in 2003, the erotic thriller directed by Jane Campion that was meant to announce a new phase in Ryan's career. It was a bold, dark, sexually explicit film, and it was exactly the kind of project that the old Meg Ryan, the pre-scandal Meg Ryan, would never have touched. Some people interpreted it as a statement. Here was a woman refusing to be confined by the image that had made her famous, choosing instead to do work that challenged audiences and challenged their assumptions about who she was. Others interpreted it as evidence that the scandal had broken something in her, that she was making desperate choices, that she was no longer the same person. The film earned $23 million worldwide. By the standards of the romantic comedies she had once headlined, it was a catastrophic underperformance. The critical reception was mixed. Some reviewers praised its ambition, others found it cold and difficult, and then there was the interview with Michael Parkinson on British television, which has become, in the years since, one of those moments that everyone remembers but almost nobody accurately describes. The Parkinson interview in October 2003 was a disaster, but it was not the disaster that people remember. Ryan was not simply rude or arrogant or difficult. She was a woman who had spent 3 years being relentlessly scrutinized for her personal life, who had watched her career suffer because of a relationship that was already over, who was now sitting across from one of Britain's most respected interviewers while he questioned her life choices in front of a live audience. She gave short answers. She looked uncomfortable. At one point she told him to wrap it up. These were not the behaviors of a Hollywood diva. They were the behaviors of a person who had reached her limit and had not yet developed the tools to handle it gracefully. Parkinson called her behavior unforgivable. The British press called her sullen, snooty, and arrogant. A poll conducted in 2006 ranked the interview as the third most shocking chat show moment in British television history, and Ryan, who had no particular platform from which to respond, absorbed it all. It was not until 2021 that Parkinson himself offered something close to a reckoning. He told Radio Times that he wished he had handled the encounter more courteously. He admitted that he had been obviously angry with her, and that it was not his place to direct that anger at a guest. He said he had come across as pompous. When asked what he would say to her if he could, he said 2 words: "I'm sorry." He added that she had played a part in it as well, which suggested that his capacity for self-reflection had its limits, but the admission itself was significant. The villain of that story had not been quite who everyone thought. Ryan's response to the Parkinson admission has been characteristically understated. She said she had not tried to speak to him after the show. She had simply left. She said she did not even know who he was when she walked into that studio, and she did not need to spend any more time thinking about him afterward. It is a response that captures something essential about who she has become. She is not performing forgiveness. She is not offering reconciliation as a public gesture. She is simply moving forward, and she has been moving forward for a long time. The years following the Parkinson interview and the commercial failures of In the Cut and Against the Ropes brought a significant change. Ryan stepped away from Hollywood almost entirely. She told interviewers that she was burned out. She said she had felt like she was watching her own life through a window, present but somehow not fully inside it. She wanted something different, something that was hers rather than something that had been constructed by an industry and maintained by public expectation. She adopted a daughter, Daisy, formerly Charlotte, from China. She became involved with CARE, a charitable organization working to address poverty through the empowerment of women. She spent time, she thought. She developed what she would later describe as her own interior life, separate from the roles she played and the stories people told about her. She also began a long and complicated relationship with country musician John Mellencamp, which lasted on and off for nearly a decade. The relationship ended around 2019, quietly, the way many of her personal stories end. Mellencamp told an interviewer afterward that he loved her, but that she had not loved him as much, and called himself a lousy boyfriend in the same breath. It was a characteristically honest assessment that illuminated something about the kind of person Ryan gravitates toward, people who are willing to be frank, even when frankness is uncomfortable. And now at 64, she's making work again on her own terms. In 2023, she returned to film with What Happens Later, a romantic comedy that she co-wrote and directed herself. It was not a blockbuster, but it was entirely hers, built around her own vision rather than around what a studio believed audiences wanted from her. That distinction matters enormously to her now. She spent a decade making films that reflected other people's ideas of what she should be, and she is not interested in returning to that arrangement. She would rather make something smaller and true than something large and hollow. What Meg Ryan is saying at 64, in the spaces between the formal interviews and the carefully managed press appearances, is something that requires patience to hear. She is saying that the story the world told about her was not the story she lived. She is saying that the affair with Russell Crowe happened inside a context that the tabloids were never equipped to understand. She is saying that her marriage was over before he arrived, that the relationship with him was real, even if it was brief, that the criticism she absorbed in the years that followed was disproportionate and often cruel, and that she survived it not by fighting back but by deciding that public opinion had no power over a person who knew herself clearly. She said as much in a conversation that has been referenced and quoted in pieces about her life in recent years. She said that being labeled a scarlet woman was, as painful as it was, also incredibly liberating. She said she no longer had to care what people thought, that there was a freedom in having nothing left to protect. She described a moment in London walking through a hotel lobby, when the room went quiet and everyone stopped to stare at her. Instead of shrinking, she laughed. She realized in that moment that shame only works if you accept it. And she had decided, somewhere in those difficult years, not to accept it. Russell Crowe, for his part, has never spoken badly of her. In the months after their breakup, he described her to a reporter as a beautiful and courageous woman. He said he grieved the loss of her company, but had not lost her friendship. He cited geography and the difficulty of sustaining a relationship across continents as the reason things ended. It was a measured, respectful account from a man who is not always known for either measure or respect. Whatever happened between them, it did not leave bitterness. It left something more complicated and more human than bitterness. At 64, Meg Ryan is not the same woman who walked into Michael Parkinson's television studio in 2003, visibly exhausted and emotionally depleted, and doing her best not to show it. She is not the same woman who posed for the photographs that appeared on every tabloid cover in 2000, hand in hand with an Australian actor outside a Hollywood party, unaware of what the next 2 decades would look like. She is someone who has lived through all of it and come out on the other side with something the tabloids never anticipated giving her clarity. She knows who she is. She knows what happened. She knows which parts of the story were true and which parts were invented by people who were never particularly interested in the truth. And she is finally saying so,